When I first got into bodybuilding, it was the Ronnie Coleman, Jay Cutler era, and it was cool to watch. But those physiques, they really didn't motivate me.
What?
For me, it was the guys like Arnold, Franco, Sergio Oliva, and Serge Nubret. Those old school bodybuilders that had massive physiques and aesthetics. Physiques that not only looked powerful, but ones that had incredible power and strength, and the ability to perform hundreds of reps on dips, pull-ups, calisthenics, and even had a high degree of athleticism. Those were always the physiques I strived for early on in training. So naturally, I dug into everything I could find on how these guys were lifting. I wanted to know why were their physiques so different. And not just from the Mr. Olympias today, but virtually anyone I see who weight trains in the gym. The guys from the 60s and 70s, they were just a different breed. And in my quest to really understand just what these guys were doing, specifically to achieve that look, I isolated 5 distinct things that virtually every old school bodybuilder did. And what was even more interesting is that I rarely see these things done today. So if you're like me, always chasing those old school aesthetics, take note on these things and make sure you're incorporating them into your training today. Number 1. They all trained with higher frequencies. This is probably the most obvious difference from bodybuilders back from the 50s all the way to the 80s. When we compare that to the 90s and all the way up to today, although higher frequencies are definitely coming back around more recently, mainly due to the science-based community, the basic bro split has really always been king amongst bodybuilders, and that includes top Olympians today. And the large majority of competitive bodybuilders over the last 30 years have all exclusively used this style of training for the most part, hitting body parts just once per week. But going back as far as the days of John Grimmick and Reg Park, 3 days per week full body training, that was the gold standard. In the Arnold era, virtually every bodybuilder was using that same 6-day per week training split, hitting every body part 2 to 3 times per week pre-contest. In the off season, they maybe trained 4 to 5 days per week, but nonetheless, nobody was following that 1 body part per week split until recently. Number 2. They all trained basic foundational movements. Today, a big argument is which exercise is better for hypertrophy. Is the pendulum squat better than a barbell squat? Is the chest supported row better than a T-bar row? Is the converging chest press machine better than a barbell bench press? And the fact is, if we go back far enough, these machines weren't even available back then. And even with some of the Nautilus machines coming out shortly after this time period, 90% of the gyms in the 60s and 70s were just barbells and dumbbells. And many of the benches and machines, they were completely handmade. Even exercises like incline barbell press. Arnold and Franco used to have to clean the weight off the floor and fall back onto the bench to perform incline press. There wasn't even an incline barbell press in most gyms. The bottom line is, these guys didn't have access to anything more than the basics. It was either go in the gym and do barbell rows and chins, or don't train your back that day. Train barbell press and dips, or don't train your pecs. You get my point. And the fact is, despite the lack of this advanced equipment, these guys built arguably the most impressive physiques on the planet in a time where, not to mention, the science of actual training was extremely limited. I mean, this is a prime example of how bodybuilding has never been a sport where someone excelled because they simply had more knowledge of bodybuilding science. They used extremely basic training technique, and it produced extremely exceptional results. 3. They all emphasize pump training.
Why would you say something so controversial yet so brave?
Now, this kind of ties into my previous statement about bodybuilding science training. Today, if you read anything about pump training, you're likely to jump on the bandwagon of the pump doesn't even build muscle. But if you talk to any old school bodybuilder, every single one of them will stress the importance of pump training. Franco Columbu once said, I train with 8 to 12 reps because that's specifically the best rep range for a pump. Serge Nubret, he literally built his entire training method around getting the most blood into the muscle and aimed to keep that pump there as long as possible. Now, of course, if you just go into a gym and the only thing you do is focus on getting a pump, you're probably not going to grow. But if you're training in a way that produces very little pump, probably not going to grow either. What the pump actually is feedback to your body. It's feedback that your training is on point. It's feedback that the exercises you're using are training the targeted muscles, and the loads that you're training with are the ideal bodybuilding rep ranges. It's also feedback that the volume, frequency, and intensities you're training with are all adequate to stimulate growth. Not only that, but also allowing for proper recovery. To dismiss pump training is simply to dismiss your body's feedback that what you're doing is working. Number 4. They all built extremely solid strength bases. It's almost impossible to train with free weights alone and not have a solid strength base. By the nature of a lot of these exercises, you're training strength and muscle growth simultaneously. But today a lot of guys will argue that strength training does nothing for muscle growth, and you simply just need to train up to 20 reps on each set while pushing each one of those to failure. But of course, there's more than one way to build muscle. And again, simply looking at the best physiques of all time, we can see that success leaves clues. Every single one of the old school bodybuilders that had massive physiques also had massive strength bases. Not just with heavy weights, they all possessed a strong body weight strength ability as well. It wasn't uncommon back then to see bodybuilders training with 20 plus reps on pull-ups to the clavicle. Plenty of these guys with body weights well over 200 pounds. Arnold would bang out 50 to 100 pull-ups before he even started his back workout. These guys all free weight barbell squatted upwards of 4 to 5 plates in the gym. They all did reps on bench press with 3 to 4 plates on the bar. They all were very strong on a lot of movements that guys today will actually say are not bodybuilding exercises. Yet, this massive strength, it built some of the most iconic physiques of all time that comes from when we hear the word bodybuilder. Number 5. They focused on the detail of the physique, not the scale weight. This one is also something that I think gets lumped into the many mistakes made today from guys that are super analytical about everything they do in their training. Many of these guys will simply say things like, I have to train a body part with 10 to 20 sets per week. I have to train each set with 2 to 3 reps shy of failure. I have to eat X number of macros, X number of calories based off my body weight and X formula. And if I want to get bigger or smaller, I simply have to do so by gaining or losing X number of pounds. What this does is it leads you to doing everything based on numbers rather than based on what your body actually needs. This is what causes people to have strong body parts that are always the body parts that are dominating their physiques. It's where you also see guys with lagging muscle groups that never change proportion over time. They're either getting bigger or they're getting leaner at best, but they're not changing. The symmetry, the proportions of the physique, it's always the same. Now, of course, everyone is bigger today. And bigger is better when it comes to competition, as that's what the judges award. But again, that's not necessarily the most aesthetic physique. Talk to any old school bodybuilder. Almost none of them actually aim to get bigger for next competition. They always aim to be more complete than they were the year before. They didn't compete at 220 pounds and say, next year I'm going to come back with the same conditioning and be 235 pounds. They always said something along the lines of, next year I want to bring my legs up to match my chest, or some other body part. And then you had guys like Frank Zane who were literally winning Mr. Olympia contests at around 180 pounds. That was because he focused so much on proportion and symmetry. So the take home here is, proportions can actually do a lot more to your physique than just pure size can. Don't get me wrong, I've been personally chasing more size for the past 20 years. And who doesn't want to get bigger, right? That's why you're here. But my point is, bigger should be in the right places versus just bigger anywhere. And one of the main differences between old school bodybuilders and any lifter today, one of the clear distinctions to bodybuilders of yesteryear, was the extreme attention to detail. So if you are looking to build a more aesthetic old school physique, don't skip any of these 5 things. And if you want the training programs that I personally recommend to build more muscle using proven old school bodybuilding methods, all my old school mass gain programs are down below. And as always, if you want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.